Hi, and welcome to my very first episode of my Chinese dramas. So in this episode, I'm going to be talking about the Prince of Lan Ling because after getting into K-dramas, it's the very first Chinese drama that I'd watched. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the summary here. So the Prince of Lan Ling is about a prophecy that was foretold that victory would come to those who had the priestess's blessing. Yang Zhiwu is the granddaughter of the last priestess of her clan, and she unwittingly becomes involved in the war between Northern Zhou and Northern Qi. Her grandmother had foreseen that her fate would be linked with the tragic fate of the Prince of Lan Ling, also Lan Ling Wang, and who's the general of Northern Qi. And so she tried her best to keep them from meeting, but despite her efforts, they end up meeting. They do end up falling in love. Zhiwu ends up helping him win the war against Northern Zhao, but fate cannot be avoided. So the genre for the show is historical romance and wuxia. It aired from August 2013 to September 2013. It had an episode length of 45 minutes and series length of 46 minutes, or 46 minutes, 46 episodes. So I'm just going to say that the next bit is going to have spoilers. So if you don't want spoilers for the show, you should stop watching now. I'm going to be talking a little bit about the characters now. So you have Gao Chang Gong, who's played by Feng Xiaofeng. He's a legendary god of war. He's undefeatable in battle. He's a strong general who possesses both intelligence and strength. Even though he's a prince, he tries to treat everyone equal, regardless of their rank or background. And the reason why he fights battles is because he believes that eventually they'll bring world peace, which that doesn't really usually happen. I mean, you have the world wars or whatever, but usually bloodshed just begets more bloodshed. Due to his looks and kind nature, he chooses to wear a fearsome mask into battle in order to intimidate his enemies. But under the mask, he becomes a cruel and ruthless general who brings victory to his kingdom. After seeing his mother not being able to be with the man she loved, he made a vow that he would love and only marry one woman in his lifetime, so that she would not have to suffer the same misery as his mother. So you have Yang Zhiwu, who's played by Ariel Lin. She's the last descendant of the legendary female line of seers known as the Heavenly Maiden. She's intelligent, kind, cheerful, and sometimes a bit too trusting. She's willing to bravely step out in order to protect what she thinks is right, even if it means putting her own life at risk. She has a limited medical knowledge, but that combined with her intelligence allows her to treat many illnesses. You then have Yu, who's played by Daniel Chan. He's a natural ruler with good looks, wisdom, perception, and strength. He can also be quite ruthless and doesn't tolerate betrayal well. In order to survive in the palace and protect his throne, he's learned to protect himself and never reveal any weaknesses. He's loving towards his niece and kind towards his servants. He views the Prince of Lan Ling as an honorable rival, and they actually end up striking up a treaty between the two states. I think the treaty is like 5 or 10 years to allow the provinces to kind of get more stable and to grow until they go back to battle, because many people have been lost on both sides. So after watching this show, I had heard that many of the elements were based around actual events. Like, obviously it had some kind of fantasy elements, and the romance elements were fictional. But Gao Chang Gong and Yu were real people. obviously his Gao Chang Gong's cousin Gao Wei is real. And the battle he fought at Jinyang was a real battle. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the history surrounding those events. And people. So you have Gao Chang Gong was born in 541 AD and he died in 573 AD. He was the fourth son of Gao Chang. His father was the elder brother of the first emperor, making him a prince of Qi. He was given the title of the Prince of Lan Ling after receiving a fiefdom in Lan Ling County, southern Shandong. He was made a general by his uncle, Emperor Wu Qing of northern Qi. So let's talk about the Battle of the Rescue of Jinyang in 564. So what makes this so remarkable is that he managed to win the battle, or at least fight his way to the front, with only 500 men against the Northern Zhao army of 100,000. So with his 500 men, he fought his way to the front, and the soldiers in Jinyang were so surprised. Well, at first they didn't recognize him, so he like took off his mask, and they were like floored that he was there, and seeing him there restored their morale. They opened the city gates, they came out, they fought with him, they managed to defeat the Northern Zhao army. Because of this victory, the soldiers had composed a song to celebrate the victory called The Prince of Lan Ling Enters the Battle Camp, also known as Great Mask. Unfortunately, this song has long since been lost in China, but it was brought over to Japan in the Tang Dynasty and is still actually performed in some ceremonies today. So after his uncle Gao Zhan, Emperor Wu Chang, passed away, his cousin Gao Wei ascended the throne. Now, his cousin was very intimidated by his renown, I guess. The fact that, the soldiers held him in high regard, and that, he was much loved by the people. His cousin was very intimidated by that. So when his cousin asked him about the Battle of Jinyang, he basically told him that because he was in charge of family affairs, he hadn't really considered the consequences of his tactics. And his cousin, that made his cousin very suspicious, which is not really unusual because his cousin's already really suspicious. And so he became afraid that Gao Chang Gong would try to usurp his throne, which is kind of funny because at least they portrayed it in the show that Gao Wei had usurped the throne himself by having his own father assassinated. So because of his suspicious nature, Gao Chang Gong, in order to waylay his cousin's suspicions, often would pretend to be sick so he could get out of his political and war obligations. Unfortunately, his efforts to lay low weren't enough, and in 473, or 573, I don't know why I was saying 473. 573, his cousin sent him a cup of poisoned wine, which he drank, and I think he was in his 30s at the time, or at least historians believe he was in his 30s. Unfortunately, 4 years after his death, Northern Qi fell to Northern Zhao, and the entire Gao family was slaughtered. This is my cat, Fizz, always the center of attention. So next, you have Emperor Ming, who's Yu and Yu. He was born in 530 AD and he died in 560. He's the eldest son of General Tai of the then Northern Wei. His mother was General Tai's concubine, Lady Yao. Yu and Tai died in 556. And in 557, Yuanyu's cousin, forced Emperor Gong of Western Wei to yield the throne to Yuanju, who became Emperor Jiamin. And Yuanju is Yuanyu's younger brother. So this ended Western Wei and established Northern Zhao. Yuanyu was made regent, but even though he was only 15, Zhao Min made an attempt to seize power from Yuanyu. And for his efforts, Yuanyu had him deposed and killed. Yuanyu then put Yuanyu on the throne, and Yuanyu became Emperor Ming. He took over some of the responsibilities from Yuanyu, but Yuanyu still had a lot of the imperial power. So Yuanyu taking over the responsibilities, some of them, made him seem very capable, I guess, to rule. But of course, everybody's paranoid and suspicious in this time. His ability to rule made Yuanyu very suspicious and concerned. And so in 560, Yuanyu had Yuanyu poisoned to death. Realizing that he was going to die and his sons were way too young, Yuanyu appointed his brother Jinyang to ascend the throne as Emperor Wu. Finally, in 572, Yuanyu was killed, or Jinyang managed to kill Yuanyu and seize full imperial power. Always has to be the center of attention. So my thoughts on the show, obviously, like, the first show you watch is always hold like a special place in your heart. Sorry. So I think that I affiliated a lot with Zhu Wu. I don't know why. Most of the scenes that I remember are scenes that she was in. So that, like, by association, that means I also remember certain scenes with Gao Chang Gong and Yuanyu because she was also in those scenes. I'm not normally an emotional person when it comes to shows, TV shows, but I became very invested in her journey, her emotional journey throughout the show. And her emotional journey in the show, I felt like it was a roller coaster of emotions, and which is very unlike me. Like, I don't get emotional during shows, at least during a lot of American shows. I used to poke fun at my parents because, you know, they would watch shows and get all teary-eyed and stuff. And then I just like sit there and watch them. My mom would get really annoyed and be like, stop staring, we're not going to cry, you know? And I just found it highly amusing. But this show was just like, I think I came the closest to crying that I've ever come in a show. So I think Ariel Lin did a really good job of portraying Yang Zhiwu. And she's just so kind and, you know, and I guess trusting and naive. I would say very trusting and naive. Like, she was like basically willing to leave her village for a man that she'd only ever met once because he'd done something kind to her, and she believed like that when somebody does something for you, you should repay them. And like, even though there was a high chance that she would never ever be able to come back, because her village was very secretive. And once outsiders knew of it, the villagers would pack up and move somewhere else. And so, yeah, so like she, in her village, she's very like, she was kind of viewed as a bit of an odd duck. She, I wouldn't say tinkered, I guess. She loved to invent things. She tinkered with explosives and gunpowder. So this kind of set her apart from other women in the village. Because of this, she was a bit of an outcast. She didn't have any friends. And so she'd helped him bring him back to the village because his horse was lame. She wanted to help him heal his horse before he went on his way. And so while he was there, he noticed that she'd gone to take part in some ceremony, and he was like kind of watching from afar. And he noticed that eventually all the women had left kind of like the stage, and she was kind of like left standing there alone. So he went out with only the intention to help her, which was, he ended up, she had like a belt that she had started to make, and so he took the belt. But it turns out that this is actually like, I would say it's almost like a handfasting ceremony or like an engagement ceremony, where the women had made this belt, and when they had a partner or somebody they were interested in, they could walk up and hand this belt and basically start their married life. But because she was such an odd duck, nobody wanted to have anything to do with her. So she wasn't chosen. And he didn't understand, like, I guess, the importance of the ceremony. So he just wanted to help her. So her grandmother was very angry that he was trying to interfere, even though he like was just trying to help her. And so I think he took her belt with him when he left. So eventually he left. But after he left, she discovered that he'd left his fearsome mask behind. So she decided to take the mask and go out into the world to give it back to him. And once she was out in the world, she realized that the world was full of suffering. And, you know, like, because she'd been completely cut off. And there are a lot of times where she, like, at the risk of her own safety, she would try and help people. And she tried to believe in the good, I guess, in the good of people. So, and I guess, like, you're shown throughout the show, like, how kind she is. Like, she ends up helping this beggar who's very sick and he can't walk, can't talk, or he won't talk. And so she ends up helping him because nobody else would go near him. And she ends up calling him a weirdo, which I think is absolutely hilarious, especially when you find out later that he's actually the Emperor Yu, and he was injured in battle and he wouldn't talk and disguised himself this way, so nobody would suspect that he was, I guess, the enemy. And even then, like, after that, she still affectionately calls him weirdo in private, which I think is really funny. But she, like, ends up going to this village that has an outbreak of cholera, and the soldiers end up going to this village, and they want to, like, basically raise the village to the ground to keep it from spreading. And she ends up being given basically 7 days to save this village. And that's how she ends up using her knowledge combined with some medical knowledge to save the village, because she, like, realizes that the water surrounding the village is stagnant, and that's why people are getting so sick. And so she teaches them how to, like, purify their own water, and eventually, like, cholera outbreak is like finished and run its course because she helped the village. She even eventually, like, she does marry Gao Chang Gong, and that's where kind of the fictional romance comes in. And even then, like, he is also very kind. Like, she discovers that he is trying to help, like, the widows and children, and even, like, the soldiers that have been horrifically maimed in battle, with his own salary. But that's, like, I guess just a stopgap measure because the money is running out, basically. Like, he's starting to run out of money to do it. And this is where I kind of the misunderstandings start to come in. I find misunderstandings that can easily communicated so annoying, because she decides she's going to try and like help this village be more self-sufficient so that they won't have to rely on him or anyone else. But she refuses to tell him about it because she wants it to be a surprise. And of course, she's going out every day and she won't tell anyone or take any soldiers with her. And so, of course, he starts to get suspicious of her outings and starts to, I guess, doubt how she feels about him. And I understand her wanting it to be a surprise, but I think one of his soldiers she takes with him, she basically had sworn him to secrecy, and he ends up telling him later on. But yeah, so like and even her interactions with Yu, like they end up having like very rocky start. He like after he becomes emperor and realizes she's the heavenly maiden, he kidnaps her. He basically uses her as propaganda because he wants people to believe that like victory will come to his state because he now has her in his grasp. And he has a very harmless snake bite him and then basically like freaks out and says he's been poisoned. And she ends up like trying to suck the blood out. And then I think he takes like a fake cure or antidote or whatever, and like proclaims that she saved him when it was all just propaganda. But I feel like she can be more herself around him. She is more upfront about how she feels about him. She's not afraid to talk back to him. He understands her better sometimes than I think her husband does. And so I had a bit of second lead syndrome for this because I really just wanted them to end up together, even though I knew that wasn't going to happen. And so, yeah, so this was my very first Chinese drama, and I loved it, honestly. I tried to go back and rewatch it, but I just couldn't. I didn't get very far into it. And I don't know. I've rewatched sad shows before. I don't know why I couldn't get back into this one, but it was the very first C-drama that I watched and I loved it. So in episode 2, I will be talking about the Arsenal Military Academy. So please come back for episode 2. If you want to be notified for any upcoming episodes, hit the notification bell below and don't forget to hit subscribe. Thank you for watching.